All right, it's preparing. Well, hello and good evening.
What's going on?
I hope there's not an echo. I thought I heard an echo there for a second, but
I'm
oh,
good.
that's why I need to. Do I need to mute that? Well, welcome everyone. Good evening to you. This is Refining Exegetics, the podcast and biblical studies channel, which aims to inspire life-changing interpretations of the Bible and our stories through modern biblical scholarship and ancient wisdom. I'm your host, Jared Kasperi. This evening, we're doing a live stream, special live stream post debate. We had a very exciting um, and important debate that happened this evening between Matthew Jansen and Carlos Xavier. The one of the things that they have in common, they're both biblical Unitarians, uh, and what they were debating was the debate question: did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses? And so, like I said, it was a very, I think, a very important debate to have. Um, and this was between two people who uh, really made for a very enjoyable debate, lacking a lot of the biting and um, sort of ego trips that tend to happen with debates along theological topics. And but these two, I believe, have an extraordinary gift to keep things calm and collected and focused in the midst of even in the midst of uh, I would say um, quite not a little disagreement. I'll put it that way on this topic in particular. Uh, so I'm joined by one or two others who may pop on. Um, how are you doing this evening?
Hey, not too bad. How are you?
Pretty good. Um, you said you were pulling a 12.
Yeah, this is an iPhone 12.
Oh, I thought you were like working 12s or something like that.
No, it's an iPhone 12, so that's, low quality. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
so that's my only excuse. Pretty
Mhm.
pretty decent debate, I thought. Um,
Mhm.
Definitely, like you said, it definitely lacked the hockey match type debate that is often, you know, that's what often happens. But
Mhm.
that's what I like. I mean, those kind of debates are, I think, are the ones like we saw tonight are like the ones where I learned the most because you're not having to you don't get the wow factor of like, oh my gosh, they're pulling punches, you know,
Mhm.
reality kind of throwing scripture back and forth to each other. I think one side did a little bit better of a job, but you know, how'd you feel about
Yeah,
it?
yeah, he kept his Carlos kept his cool, but definitely there at the very end really took his closing statement, capitalizing on that to get polemical and a bit zesty, as Brother Matthew would say. Um, I would say it
Yeah,
was a little bit out of place given the general tenure of the debate. Um,
yeah,
it kind of ended on a sour note, I should say. but he's got to get his punches in somewhere. It's hard to get
Sure.
punches anywhere in with somebody like Matthew, because he's so calm and collected
Right.
and doesn't egg you on, and he takes the little subtleties quite well and just moves on, doesn't get
Yeah.
caught up in that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
What I'm doing now is I'm gonna go over to my post here and put the Zoom link in the comment here. Nope, that is not the Zoom link. We'll get going here. Let's pop in here. All right, that's up. Let's see. All right. Uh, we'll see if anybody else pops in. Um, yeah, the generally, yeah, it, um, what kind of an overall like big picture thought for me is Carlos's premises and the sort of argumentary pathway he goes uh is quite odd to me. Like it's I don't hear that often. Um, I mean, of course, there's the general, um, well, uh, obviously for um reasons, uh, the law of Moses doesn't apply to believers, and that's a separate issue. But particularly with the question of did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses, um, it my perception is that just in my experience is a negative position on that question is quite uh strange to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's like, well, like even people who aren't um pronomian, among most evangelical believers, if you ask them, did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses, and they hear somebody say no, like you might see a good majority of them give like a double take, like what,
Yeah.
wait, what do you mean?
Makes more
um
sense. Think about it.
it's like because there, I mean, you think about it, there's a number of uh fundamental foundational tenets in evangelical Christianity that are based on the idea that Jesus obeyed the law of Moses.
Sure. Yeah.
Uh, one of which is justification through the perfect obedience of Jesus.
Right.
To do something that we couldn't do.
Yeah.
And if Jesus is doing a different law than the law of Moses, then that whole premise, that whole kind of thing just kind of falls away. And it's like that there's
Yeah.
no place for it anymore. and and so you'd have a lot of evangelicals sort of scratching their heads. It's like, wait a minute. I mean, he's supposed to do what I couldn't do.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's the whole point of faith, justification by faith and not by works, is because we couldn't do that thing, that the impossible thing that Jesus did.
Right.
And here we have an interlocutor who's saying no, he didn't do that. And
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. It's the entire purpose for the Messiah. I mean, the entire purpose is kind of tossed in the trash. if you take Carlos's position. And I don't quite understand how you can take that position. I don't think there's lots of different doctrines in the world that you can, even if you don't hold certain doctrines, you can see where people get the doctrine from. You can see where they piece it together from scripture. I
Mhm.
can't see that with Carlos's, with his arguments. I can't see that at all. I,
Yeah, and it did seem a bit convoluted to me, his opening statement. It seemed to be, I found it really hard to follow. I
yeah,
mean, it's kind of all over the place. It was like it's typical of something where you sort of piece together this theology
yeah,
um out of thin air.
sure,
And it seems to be something that Carlos is doing. Like that's just that's what you end up with is his opening statement that is kind of hard to follow.
sure,
He's not really talking about scriptures. He makes references to some passages here or there, but then he says things that those passages don't say.
yeah,
And there's this big thing that whenever people say, well, this passage just teaches, and then they say something that
that it
that
doesn't
is
teach.
that doesn't say
Yeah,
that is not in there, and so um that that's kind of what struck me, whereas Matthew's, I mean, not to be biased or anything like that, but it was just Matthew's opening statement was clear and concise, easy to follow,
yeah,
A, B, C, D, even chronological
right,
order through the gospel narratives about uh, his early life,
right,
Jesus' early life, um, and so um, it was easy to grasp his argument, his points, whereas with Carlos, it's just it was mushy.
yeah,
I, I don't know how else to put it. I'm trying to be charitable with it. I mean,
sure.
it really is strange to me.
I think charity can only go so far, unfortunately.
Mhm.
I One thing I did like about Matthew's opening statement the most was that he opened up with the way that Yeshua was raised. He's
Mhm.
raised or observant, very, very Jewish household. And um, I think about the verse that says, raise up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're older, they shall not depart from it. And
Mhm.
if you kind of take, I think if you take Carlos's position, you can't really say that that verse applies to Christ. I mean, he was obviously raised in a Torah observant, very Jewish household.
Mhm.
I enjoyed that part of Matthew's opening statement a lot. I thought that was pretty wise.
Yes. Yeah.
And like you said, I want to be charitable. I do as much as possible to Brother Carlos. I and I hope I'm not making assumptions here. I kind of feel like in a way that he's fighting a dying battle and he knows
Mhm.
it, and it's just grasping. It's just grasping for whatever.
Mhm.
Because I don't see I don't see how he can. I wouldn't be able to take his position and have full faith in Scripture and
Mhm.
say I can derive completely 100%. I can derive all of my understanding for this doctrine from the words of Scripture. I would not be able to do that, nor do I think anyone else can.
It's sort of strange. One thing that jumped out at me was at the very end of Carlos's rebuttal period to Matthew's opening statement. Uh, it was quite literally. I mean, I think it was like the last one or two sentences where he stated to the effect that the Sinai covenant and the new covenant and Messiah oppose each other.
Right.
Like he literally says they oppose each other, and I'm like, Carlos literally believes that God makes covenants that contradict and oppose each other.
Right.
Like, think about that statement for a moment. and
Hmm.
maybe again he's saying things off the cuff. And sometimes we say things a certain way, and we're just kind of riffing and trying to make a statement. But I mean, that really is kind of a fundamental premise in his argument, is that the new covenant is something that it has to be opposed to the Sinai covenant because they have their cross purposes.
Right.
It's like, and so the moment that you make a statement like that, you got to think, maybe I should think about my thoughts for a second,
Hmm.
and what those thoughts imply, and what are the necessary implications and entailments of that thought. You are necessarily entailing that God makes covenants that oppose each other.
Right.
So you have a God who's opposing himself and his own purposes. Um, and so
Uh,
um, how do you get to that point where you're so entangled
yeah.
that you make statements like that?
I don't know if it's simply an unwillingness. I don't want to apply anything. I don't want to say that Carlos is acting maliciously in any way. I don't quite think he is. I think he really believes what he's teaching. Um, but yeah, just to say that two covenants that came from the same God would, I mean, not just in a few points oppose each other, but completely night and day oppose each other.
Mhm.
It almost sounds like, and I've said this before, it almost sounds like the doctrine that kind of says that, you know, God sent the Messiah, and the Messiah saved us from his brutal, abusive dad.
Mhm.
You know, just kind of took everything that
Right. Yeah.
had taught and said, none of that's useful anymore. Now you're just going to listen to me. It's like there's that the I think it's a New Testament. It's just a book that says just the words of Jesus. I don't know if you've seen that. It's just a book that says it's just titled just the words of Jesus, and that's kind of what it sounds like to me.
Mhm.
So I don't think I was kind of confused about halfway through the debate because and I'm this might just be the way I was reading him. It almost sounded like Carlos forgot about everything he said and just started to agree with everything Matthew said. I don't know if you noticed this, like, you know, with like when Matthew brought up, no, Matthew didn't bring it up. Carlos brought up Isaiah 65 and 66 about um, the law being taught to the nations, and new Levites being picked, and priests. Um,
I actually missed that part. I must have missed that part.
it might have been at the question and answer part at the end.
Hmm.
Um, but
Yeah, there was a bit of that I missed.
as they're going back and forth, Matthew's saying, yada 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 this, and Carlos is just rebutting back, saying, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. And it kind of sounded like he just conceded completely. So I was a little bit
Mhm.
confused by that. That was a very good debate tactic because, as far as I understand, you should never never concede or
Right.
try not.
I mean, there's the usual misnomers committed, um, like the Acts 15, Peter referring to the yoke that neither we nor our fathers could have borne, and
Yeah,
that's uh the common move of, that's the law of Moses, and so we're freed from that. And um I mean, that's sort of par for the course, but it's just the unique way in which Carlos employs those in this larger argument uh of Jesus being under his own law,
yeah,
That just, I mean, that in its of itself is so weird that I mean he refers to Yeshua as the new covenant lawmaker. Like, I mean, Carlos, you're a Unitarian.
Right, right.
There is one lawgiver that's Yotevave. That's Hashem. Uh, he he and Yeshua is this human Messiah, which Carlos agrees with. Um,
Yeah,
the Messiah is not a lawmaker,
right.
not a lawgiver. And it is really strange because I mean Carlos would affirm uh, that the gospel or that Yeshua says, um, "My teaching is not my own."
Right,
It's like
right.
here we have. I mean, you're saying things exactly the opposite of what Jesus says. So
Yeah.
it's just it. You have any thoughts to that regard?
Well, it sounds like it almost sounds like Carlos. It it reminds me of Deuteronomy 13 about the false prophet. And
Mm,
I hope I'm being charitable. I'm not saying Carlos is doing this, but this is where my mind goes when he's talking about this. I was just reading in Deuteronomy 13 here. It says, after the warning about the false prophet, you have verse 4. You must follow the Lord your God and fear him. You must keep his commands and listen to his voice. You must worship him and remain faithful to him. It
mhm,
almost, I mean, right there, remain faithful to him. Carlos is essentially saying that we have a new standard to be faithful to. And I don't I don't see any of the disciples uh, doing away with the law. I don't see the Messiah either. I see even Paul saying, we have to remain faithful to the end. So, but to what?
mm.
It, I wonder what Carlos's answer would be to that. What are we truly to, what are we not supposed to pull our foot back from? I think Paul says, not to draw your foot back.
Mm.
So it sounds he almost is essentially saying that Yeshua is a false prophet. I know he wouldn't say that, but that's just a
When when
logical way to.
Matthew, yeah, when Matthew brought that up, I think it was in the um, I wasn't in the rebuttal or the cross exam. I think it was actually during the Q&A. Um, it was brought up, um,
He bring up
Deuteronomy
Deuteronomy 13.
13,
Okay,
and Carlos sort of hand waved that away, because what the text is talking about is worshiping other gods.
yeah,
And well, and uh, yes, but contextually, historically, what worshiping other gods
yeah,
looks like is doing things other than the law that God gave.
right,
And that's how the nations worship their other gods, is by doing things against the law of Moses or contrary to it. And
right,
God at Sinai gives instructions for how we are to worship him. And it's
yeah,
not like the ways that the other nations worship their gods. And so you can't really separate that. Um,
mm,
if you're the law gives us revelation of God's character, his ways, and his person, his being. And so if you're to worship him, you do it when you when you walk out the commandments, you're worshiping God. So
yeah,
it's like you can't conceptually separate those two. I mean, you can try, but you end up with bad theology.
yeah. Grasping for straws.
Hmm. Um, had a oh yeah, Carlos made much ado about the word break, and it's like
Yeah,
the Yeshua broke the commandments, and then Jesus in Matthew 12 gives the very example of priests who break.
Yeah.
And certain English translations say, yes, say break the Sabbath when they do their priestly duties. And Jesus is making the very argument that they're guiltless, they're innocent in doing so. But the word is actually profane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that in a ritual context, which everything in the temple is ritual.
Sure.
It's a ritual context of purity regulations of um, and everything is a sort of controlled environment to that involves making distinctions between common
Yeah.
and pure,
Yeah.
profane and holy. So in the Torah is built in its very fabric this distinguishing between common and pure,
Mhm.
holy and profane. And uh, what Yeshua is drawing upon is the principle that when a priest is doing priestly duties on the Sabbath, he's in undertaking um, a heightened function of purity in comparison to which the Sabbath becomes less holy.
Yeah.
It becomes common, and thus a priest is profaning the Sabbath, not breaking the Sabbath.
Right. Right.
And the Greek word there is chosen deliberately. There's a different word when it's talking about breaking. Like for instance, when uh, in John 5, when the Pharisees, after the healing, said that they sought all the more to kill him because not only did he break the Sabbath, that's a different word. And Carlos, he glosses this. He knows. I know he knows these words, but he deliberately um, chooses to gloss over them in order to make
Right.
his argument.
Yeah.
Because profaning the Sabbath is in a ritual context in terms of heightened uh, jurisdictions. Um, uh, a priest goes into a higher jurisdiction
Sure.
than the jurisdiction of the Sabbath when he's doing his priestly duties on the Sabbath. And by virtue of that, by comparatively speaking, the Sabbath becomes less holy.
Yeah.
It doesn't become unholy, it just becomes less holy to him. And therefore, he's profaning the Sabbath. He's treating it as more common.
Yeah. I don't think, I'm not sure Carlos understood or understands, um, is it plerao or
Mhm.
pleru in the word for fulfilled?
Yeah, that's
The
another. Yeah, go into that. Yeah.
the very common Christian understanding, the one I held for obviously my entire life until 3 years ago, was that when Christ said he fulfilled the law, that actually meant, this is the argument as old as time, that he actually meant that he was doing away with it, even though he just told you not assume or to not
Mhm.
even think that I came to do it. And I think Matthew brought up that, is it almost directly after that, Christ says, uh, essentially, woe to anyone who would loosen these commandments.
Mhm.
I don't know how, I can't read that and say, oh, Yeshua, the Messiah, didn't keep the law of Moses. He's instructing people not to assume he came to do away with it and to not
Mhm.
loosen them.
Mhm.
So
Carlos has a very hodgepodgey uh, reading of that passage, as demonstrated in Matthew's cross-examination
yeah,
of that passage with him. Uh, he is. I'm glad that Matthew really took him to task on that point, because he's like, Carlos, okay, the law and the prophets in 5:17, that's the law of Moses, correct? Yes, law of
right,
Moses. In 5:18, not one jot or one tittle will pass away. Which law is that, Carlos? The law of Moses, he says.
right,
Right. Okay. So whoever loosens one of the least of these commandments, oh, not the law of Moses.
Right. Yeah.
that's that's Jesus's new commandments. And I'm like, and when pressed, Carlos has nothing but it has to be.
Right.
That's what he said, is like it has to be. Like, well, yeah, it has to be in order for you to
For
maintain
your
your
art.
position,
Right.
Carlos, but it doesn't have to be contextually. In fact, it can't be contextually.
Right. Right. I think,
That was the weirdest, no, the funniest part to me was that
yeah,
exchange there.
I mean, I keep coming back to Carlos's arguments really seem to be lacking. Obviously, I mean, I think both of us obviously agree that they lack contextual understanding.
Hmm.
But even if he does have some understanding of like good, proper um, contextual understanding of scripture, he doesn't employ it. I mean, he doesn't. I'm not sure like he understands halakha. I'm not really sure he understands the entire, I mean, the entire sphere that Christ is living in, Christ and all the disciples,
Hmm.
all of them, having grown up around, if not being a part of Jewish schools and hearing in the synagogue every single Sabbath, they would have heard the words of Moses being taught.
Hmm.
And about I think about when Paul he says, I'm not sure what book it's from, but he says that he's not without law, but he is within the law of Christ.
Yeah, First Corinthians 9,
Yeah,
21.
I used to struggle with that a lot until I understood what Paul is talking about there is he's within the law as according to Christ. You know, that's at least that's my understanding. I don't know if you have a
Yeah,
different understanding of that.
that would be how I would take that too,
Yeah.
more or less.
And I don't think you can understand Paul. I really don't think you can understand Messiah unless you understand the different laws. And you've talked about this on your live streams before. The different laws that are conflicting with each other. As far as I understand, there's three or more laws present
Mm.
in Scripture. The law of Moses, the oral law, the law of Jesus, and the law of sin and death, as I understand it. So, three or four. And the law of Moses and the law of Christ are the same thing. And you see Christ essentially in the debate ring, seems like all the time, with the Pharisees and with those who held to oral tradition.
Mm.
And I don't think that you can properly understand much of Paul or much of um, Christ's early life and or his ministry unless you understand the conflicting laws there.
Mm.
I can
I
see
just
how
wish,
someone,
oh, go ahead.
you go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I just wish Carlos would uh, exert the same level of rigor that he does in talking about uh, the issue of debating the nature of Christ, the deity of Christ, and that idea, um,
Yeah,
uh, and the level of meticulousness that he
sure.
exerts in that domain. I just wish he would. And Carlos, if you ever if you ever listens to this, Carlos, uh, why don't you use the same level of rigor when talking about this topic?
Right.
It's like it 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 seems like he just drops the ball.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like you could learn a lot more about uh this trajectory of scholarship if you just do a
Right.
little bit of reading. I mean, it doesn't take years and years. Um, uh, o- op- Open up a little Mark Nanos, open up a little Paul Sloan,
Yeah.
And like what Matthew gave a few suggestions, and one of those was Paul Sloan's book Jesus and the Jewish Law.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right though. I mean, the kind of research and what it requires of someone to come from a Trinitarian standpoint into a Unitarian standpoint does require a lot of like rightly dividing word.
mhm.
And if I think I don't know if Carlos said he was a Trinitarian at one point. I don't know if he just came straight into Unitarianism. Um,
He seemed to indicate in his introduction that he basically went from starting out as agnostic and went straight into Unitarian.
okay, okay. Well, I mean, it still takes so much to defend that against the whole world of
Mhm.
Christendom that is pretty much wholeheartedly a Trinitarian religion. It takes so much to continually defend that doctrine. You would think that, like you said, you'd think that he would employ the same amount of effort and meticulousness as he does with the law, whether or not Christ followed the law of Moses. You know.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Yeah.
hey, if you give me a minute, I'm gonna grab a phone charger real quick. Just
Got
give
it.
me
Mhm.
2 minutes.
Yeah. So if you're just tuning in, uh, I'm doing this live stream to sort of open up a discussion, kind of an after debate show for a debate that just happened earlier this evening, about a couple hours ago, over the question: did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses? And so the topic in general was the law of Moses, uh, and uh, and we had two individuals, Matthew Jansen and Carlos Xavier, who were uh, the opponents in that debate. So we're sort of giving that a little bit of a review, and seeing where we go from there, what kind of discussion happens. If you're watching and have any questions, and uh, be sure to post in the live chat. And there's also, oh, and forgive me, I was a little absent-minded. I forgot to pin the Zoom link into the chat. There we go. Let me pin that at the top. There we go. So those watching on YouTube, now you should be able to see in the live chat the Zoom link. Feel free to keep watching, or if you're interested in coming on, if you watched the debate and want to join the discussion about it, or if you didn't watch the debate and have some questions, uh, any or all are welcome at this time. All right, you're back.
All right. Yep, I'm back. I don't think he tries to lead off with this argument that Christ came to bring a new law. And I don't know, I don't remember if Matthew actually brought up Jeremiah 31 to him. I'm sure he did. I feel like I heard him say that. Bring
Yeah,
it.
maybe he said it once. Yeah.
Um, I'm not quite sure how Carlos would. I mean, I can assume how he would interpret that in light of the debate tonight. I'm not sure how he could defend that with the entirety of Scripture. I'm sure he would try. Um,
I can imagine. I mean, I'm just trying to put myself in that sort of headspace and see if I could reason my way to the premise, or back to the premise if I'm confronted with a passage like that. And I would imagine
if
that he
I'm
would say something. What's that?
well, if I may,
Yeah,
I don't want to stop you, but I
go ahead.
think I think the only way I think the only way you could harmonize Jeremiah 31 with Carlos's position would be would be to be a Trinitarian. Essentially,
Hmm.
would be to have two gods. I know I understand that's not the Trinitarian position, but to have two equals who are
Hmm.
able to impose different things. You know, both of them having that ability.
Or sort
That's
of this interaction between the eternal Father and the eternal Son, where the Son comes on the scene, he
yes,
sends the Son into the world, and the Son decides, oh yeah, and this is my new law. And
yes,
the father's like, well, my hands are tied. He's God too. So
right. Yeah, I can't disagree with myself, even though he's
I
disagreeing with me.
endorse that message
Right.
because he's God, like me.
Yeah.
And I mean, my thought was, I mean, from a on a theological level, not necessarily relationally between the Father and the Son, and the issues that you're raising with that. Theologically, I could see somebody like Carlos making the move. Well, it says it's written on your heart. Well, what that really means is it's spiritualized and made something different
Right.
than the that he would make. I mean, Carlos makes much ado about this idea of the law of Moses being the letter of the law, and Jesus coming
Yeah.
with it's real, like that's absolute next to the spirit of
Right.
the new teaching that Messiah brings in the spirit. Uh, and unfortunately, and again, I admit that my reading of this term letter that pops up a few times in Paul's writings, I had to admit that um, this is a minority, an extreme minority view. Um, but letter
Would you mind
doesn't.
briefly mentioning it? I
Yeah.
mean, I don't
So
derail.
when Paul, for instance, when he's in Romans 2:27 says that um, you, though having, or you through uh, grammaton um, per, um, the circumcision.
Yeah.
So the Greek term is grammatos,
Hmm.
and which various English translations render it either as just letter or the written code. Some uh, um, contemporary English translations just gloss it over as the law of Moses. um,
Hmm.
and so Paul is making this argument indicting a so-called Jew who boasts in law while he's transgressing the law. And um, Paul says that, well, there's Gentiles who, though not having this law that you boast in, are nonetheless um, fulfilling the righteous requirements of the law.
Right.
And these ones who are uncircumcised and yet are obeying the law will condemn you who through letter and circumcision are a transgressor of the law.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there's uh, this sort of irony happening that there's this person that the interlocutor would say is godless, is a sinner, and yet he's
Yeah.
actually, because he's uncircumcised, really, is the sticking point for the interlocutor, is that this Gentile is uncircumcised. Well, I'm circumcised. I have this outward mark. Um, And Paul is saying it's actually through your circumcision and your boasting in that you're a transgressor of the law of Moses.
Hmm.
Um, Later on in Romans 7, Paul says that we serve not in the oldness of grammatos, but in the newness of the spirit. Um, I contend that letter is not referring to this dichotomy between letter of the law versus spirit of the law, because letter of the law never appears in Paul's writings. It's not a term that he uses. It's just simply grammatos.
Okay.
Um, and I contend that this term is a technical term that refers to the regulation, the body of regulations itself.
I think
That a
I figured
person,
that's where you're going with it.
yeah. So it's sort of it's sort of it seems to me to be another metonym term that catches a lot of that carries a lot of different um reference, but
Yeah,
there's a nature to all those reference, and that nature is that it's a righteousness of one's own making.
I see. Yeah.
um it's regulations that one invents to establish that one is the the you know there's a similar sort of expression that Jesus brings up, and I forget where it's at in the Gospels, but uh the narrator, the gospel writer, is saying that there were those among the Pharisees who wanted to justify themselves.
Yeah.
Um, and they come and they say, I'm trying to remember the exact uh, exchange that this is taking place, that um, but Yeshua's answer to that is the parable of the tax collector um, and the Pharisee.
Mhm.
The Pharisee, they both come before the Lord, and the Pharisees, I'm glad that I'm not like this person. I tithe this and that. There's these little niceties things that he does, and um, what's particular is that these things aren't actually things that are in the law of Moses. They're just things that he has decided make him righteous and above tax collector.
Mhm.
All the while, he's actually not close to the Lord. Um, while conversely, the tax collector is doing what the law of Moses requires, which is to humble himself. Um, and what does it say? What Jesus says, which one will go home justified? In other words, which
Mhm.
one will go home righteous? Well, the tax collector, because he's obeying the law of Moses.
Right.
He's repenting, he's humbling himself. Whereas
Right.
the Pharisee, who is doing these things that aren't even in the law of Moses, he's just arbitrarily decided that these make me righteous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Justifying oneself, that's letter.
Right.
Um,
I
and
see.
that's uh, it comes up, the term letter comes up again in 2 Corinthians 3. That's the infamous passage about the ministry of condemnation, that
Yeah.
darn law of Moses that just condemns. It can't really do anything else. Um, uh, what is the context? Well, Paul's, since the early portions of chapter 2, is having to defend his apostolic authority,
Yeah.
and his way of doing things in the midst of other super apostles, um, so-called apostles, who are coming in, and they come in like great pomp and circumstance, and
Right.
uh, a big showing, and boasting outwardly, and then Paul does a midrash on them.
Yeah.
uh because they're coming with letters of recommendations, letters, and then Paul does a play on words. Uh they're coming with letters. Well, they're trusting in letter, and
Mhm.
then Paul does a midrash on Exodus 34, where letters engraving on stone is referring to the first stone tablets that were broken, because the people's heart weren't set to obey the Lord.
Yeah.
So a midrash is, no, Paul's not talking, he's not riffing on the law of Moses. He's riffing on stone tablets that were broken because the people's hearts were rebellious.
Right.
And he's putting these so-called apostles who are undermining his apostolic authority and speaking a different message, and wondering why he's coming in and so weak and frail outwardly. He refers to himself as wasting away.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
Outwardly. Um, but this is all ironic twist. These ones who are coming in such glory, they're actually the ones who are fading away because they're not doing the will of God. They're not going from glory to glory. They're actually their glory is short lived, and they're gonna they're
Yeah.
not gonna last. Their ministry is not gonna last, and their ministry only brings condemnation because they're bringing not a message of light and truth, but they're bringing a message of their own boasting, and it's
It
leading to
reminds
division.
it reminds me of there's a prophecy about the Messiah, how he would come to a people whose faces were essentially clouded in darkness. Um, it might be in Micah. Um, not
Mm,
quite not quite able to remember where it's from. And as I've understood that, it's just a Hebrew. Someone's face being clouded in darkness or shrouded in darkness is a Hebrew idiom for essentially being under oppression or being under bad
mm,
teaching.
mm,
And I think that would piggyback well off of what you're saying about Paul.
mm-hmm,
Uh, the oral tradition being essentially being elevated above God's law.
mm,
Um, I think it also go back to when Yeshua says, the Pharisees, they sit in Moses' seat, so do everything they tell you, but don't do after their ways.
mm.
Uh,
So the midrash is an indictment on Paul's opponents, not an indictment on the law of Moses.
sure. Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
putting them in the place of Moses, who's veiling their eyes, veiling his face, but
Mm-hmm.
he's doing that ironically, because these ones are actually, they're veiling their true intentions, their true
Yeah.
selves,
Mm-hmm.
under a mask of pomp and,
Sure.
and this outward glory. Whereas Paul, who's outwardly weak, frail, he's not veiling himself.
Mm-hmm.
He says, "We with unveiled faces show forth the glory of the knowledge of God in the face of Jesus, so the face of Messiah." I mean,
Yeah.
um, so that I mean, it just seems like when um I feel like my reading of that is more contextually accurate when you set it in the context of his defending of his apostleship. And he goes into chapter 4, talking about these vessels, these jars of clay, um, speaking of himself and the other
Yeah.
apostles who are beaten down and oppressed on every side. But it's to show that there's this treasure in these jars
Yeah.
of clay.
Yeah. I don't have much more time.
Mm,
I did want to mention though, Carlos, his position really, it really leaves you with, in my understanding, a lawless Messiah.
mm,
I know that he said that no, he was raised in Torah and was raised by the law of Moses. Um, but I can't help but to think if Yeshua's parents taught him, if they essentially Deuteronomy 6 him,
Hmm.
which they were supposed to, and they did. And Yeshua grows up, and then he just says, essentially, "Hey, mom and dad, everything you taught me, um, I'm kind of leaving it on the side of the road. I'm going to go my own way." Um, I can't help but think that's in some way breaking the commandment to honor your mother and father.
Hmm.
Maybe I'm reading into
Hmm.
that. I
No,
that just
I can see that. Yeah.
that's where my mind goes. I don't think I don't think that it's a I don't think this doctrine is going to last Carlos very long. I think that
Hmm.
it's going to fizzle out, and I pray that the Father really really softens his heart on this.
Hmm.
I don't think he's an unintelligent person. I think he's an intelligent guy. I think he's a very seems like a very sweet guy. I just don't I don't think that this doctrine is going to suit him well for very long. And
Hmm.
I pray the Father reveal some truth to him, some more truth. You
Hmm.
know, he's already got some things down, but so I
Yeah.
appreciate having me on
Yeah. Good
tonight.
stuff. Mhm. Yeah.
I'm gonna,
Appreciate your input and for the time to come on and join me.
yeah,
I don't like
absolutely.
monologuing a lot, so
No, I mean, I'm new to all this. I think I'm much newer to this than you are. So, um, I appreciate the wisdom and all. I'm gonna head to bed and so I can get to the job site in the morning. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Like
cool.
seeing the pictures.
Oh yeah, heck yeah. I was glad to get that done. He's having me move somewhere
Hmm.
upstairs tomorrow, so that'll be good.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost got the wainscoting done on the
Oh
door
yeah,
that the owners, they're actually gone for till Monday. So it's like I gotta put a hold on on
right.
that and finish up on Monday.
Did you find a laborer?
Yeah, actually,
Good.
I did. And he's actually more in a labor. He's a really good fit. Really exactly what I was looking for. He actually runs his own uh construction business,
Oh, cool.
remodel
He's got some
business.
experience.
Yeah, so he's got a bit of experience. I really was able to just tell him my plan and the layout, and was able to just let him go and do it while I worked on the other parts. So.
Good, cool. Well,
Mhm.
I'm looking forward to seeing the end result.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. Well, bless you. Shalom.
Cool. Shalom.
Have a good week.
Yeah. Have a good night. See you.
Bye bye. All right. Let's see what's going on. Anybody else? Anybody else watching? Feel free to um, leave a comment in the chat. Let me know you're here. Got a little bit more time to go in this live stream, so we got some time if you are interested in joining the discussion. I got the Zoom link pinned there in the live chat, so feel free to click that and we can discuss. So again, we're basically the point of this live stream was to, if you're just tuning in, is to do sort of an after debate show, a little review, thoughts on how the debate earlier tonight went between Matthew Jansen and Carlos Xavier on the question, did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses? Matthew Jansen took the positive position, with Carlos Xavier taking the negative position. And again, it's quite interesting to me, at least, to hear a believer take a negative position on this question, because even among uh, traditional Protestant, evangelical, and even Catholic and Eastern Orthodox positions, traditions, uh, most evangelical, most Christian uh, uh, people on this question would give a resounding yes, to this question, even as they, unlike myself, don't think that the law of Moses has any applicability or importance to the life of a believer. Um, there's a lot there's a lot theologically hanging on the premise that Jesus perfectly walked out, obeyed, and practiced the law of Moses. Because otherwise, if he didn't, and well, there's the problem that creates of him being a sinner. Carlos has in the debate taking the negative position has a way, or he feels, of circumventing that objection. But beyond the objection of it making him a sinner, it also theologically, again, there's a lot of systematic theology that's kind of burrowed into this question, because it's the expectation, or at least the idea in a lot of Christian thinking, that the reason why it's important that Jesus practiced and obeyed the law of Moses, and not like his own law that he introduced, is because, well, that's God's requirement for us to be righteous, is that we obey the law of Moses. That was the standard, and everybody, the standard of righteousness is that you had to perfectly obey this law of Moses, but none of us could, and only one person in all of history did, so that he could justify us by imputing his righteousness to us. Um, so I mean, that's that's par for the course. I mean, that's basic fundamental Christianity 101 in the evangelical world. Um, and yet you have Carlos here taking the position that no, Jesus didn't obey the law of Moses. Well, he did up to a certain point, until he was maybe baptized, or shortly before he was baptized, and then once he began his new covenant ministry, he was actually going about doing his own law. And that's the position that Carlos takes. An interesting position, that I think just creates a lot of difficulties, a lot more problems than it solves. Um, let's see. This was a I don't normally enjoy debates at all. I typically stick around for maybe opening statements, um, on some topics. Once I get maybe a couple minutes into the person taking the position that I don't agree with, after a couple minutes into their opening statement, sometimes I just skip ahead and go to the rebuttal. Sometimes it's just like, oh, I this hurts my brain. That's sort of, uh um I used to be able to just watch things or listen to things that I disagreed with for a while, but my tolerance level has significantly decreased over time for those things. Whether it's just my time is more precious to me, maybe it's a little bit of that. Maybe it's also a little bit of tired of hearing this stuff. Maybe it's sort of like that too. But there's huge swaths of debates, that I sort of just skip over, try to find tolerable parts. But this debate was, I actually was able to listen pretty much all the way through. I didn't skip any parts. Well, I mean, I watched most of it live. I was able to catch most of it, and it was enjoyable because both Matthew Jansen and Carlos Xavier are two individuals who sort of uh keep the ego trips down. Matthew Jansen is a very calm and collected individual who seeks to embody uh the 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 ways of not only the Messiah but the ways of God, uh, practicing patience, long suffering, kindness, gentleness, um, endeavoring to be at peace with all, even with those who disagree vehemently with him on various topics, and um, just has an all around the fruits of the spirit when it comes to the debates. He's a very calm individual, but and presses when needed, uh, and he doesn't let things get out of hand. And Carlos, for the most part, he can be polemical at times, especially on this topic. He's ardently against uh, any notion that uh, Jesus would expect us um, to seek after obedience and walking according to the law of Moses. Uh, he not only sees it that there's those who within Christianity who are opposed to that idea, but in general, they're like, well, I mean, if you want to do that, that's okay. Carlos is one where it's like it's more you're severed from Christ. Yeah, if you try to go back to that old covenant, that old law, you're enslaving yourself. He gets very polemical. He didn't very much at this debate, except for the very end. He sort of uh, took the closing statement part as his opportunity to kind of let fly with the polemics, and sort of ending things on a sour note. It seemed quite out of place, really, given the general tenor of the debate um, up to that point. So, anyways, yeah. So, good debate. Ah, I see Dan is in the chat. You're in Colombia. Well, that's amazing. Um, yeah, good to see you pop in here. Um, let's see what else we got going on here. Trying to think if I have any other highlights from the debate to share. Mhm. And again, if you're watching the live stream, I have a Zoom link pinned to the chat, to the live chat at the top there. If you're interested in coming on and discussing the debate, whether you were able to watch it uh, or are just curious about what the debate was about, or curious in talking about the topic of whether Jesus practiced and preached the law of Moses, or as the the negative person taking the negative position in this debate, Carlos Xavier, he argued that Jesus did not practice and preach the law of Moses. He came and practiced and preached his law, what uh, what would be called the law of Messiah. The Matthew Jansen, the person taking the positive position, uh, understands the law of Moses, well, the law of Messiah, rather, to be um, the law of Moses as interpreted and lived out by Jesus. So you have uh, basically two. Um, you have it's just one and the same law. Um, Matthew's position, for instance, in the Sermon on the Mount, is that opening up with verse Matthew 5:17, Jesus says explicitly that he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Um, and Matthew takes the position that fulfill, the plerao verb there in its active voice, refers to teaching and explaining fully the law. And his argument would be, and I agree in general that this bears out because he goes on to say that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. Righteousness here in this context is the walking out of commandments. And Jesus is going to lay out a number of contrasting statements to the effect to show where the walking out, the halakha, is the Jewish legal term, um, of the scribes and the Pharisees is actually not sufficient to be considered righteous. They're not actually they're not correctly teaching and interpreting the law of Moses, and they're bringing in lots of other traditions that actually, in many respects, uh, set to naught or nullify the commandments. And Jesus would be bringing forth his own interpretation of the law of Moses to correct those traditions. So that would be Matthew Jensen's position. So, yes, in that regard, Jesus is practicing and preaching the law of Moses in the very Sermon on the Mount. Um, Carlos's position is that the antithesis statements throughout Matthew 5 are actually his own law that are setting aside the law of Moses that he would refer to as just rote letter, um, outward observance, that are insufficient to do anything. And he's bringing the law of Messiah. And I just find that to be a very weird reading that creates a lot of problems. Let's see. Let me think if I can remember something from the Q&A section that jumped out to me. Um, oh, well, back on the subject of pleroo, and the uh, where Jesus says, "I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill." Carlos's argument on this point would be that uh, that verb pleroo, uh, as it occurs 5 or 6 times through the book of Matthew, including here in Matthew 5:17, uh, he wants to collapse them all into the same sort of meaning. which is to fulfill, as in like fulfill prophecy, uh, where you have this idea that you have this list of tasks or these uh, prophecies, and once somebody comes and does the tasks, or a prophecy is waiting to be fulfilled, and he comes in and somebody comes in, well, does something that fulfills that prophecy, that means that prophecy is closed, or that the list of tasks is done, and you can sort of take that and file it away. um uh Unfortunately, what that sort of position, um well, it's not an exegetical position, because it's just sort of clumping it all into one. It's not bearing in mind any kind of context. It's not bearing in mind parsing, because there are a couple times, I believe, in Matthew where the verb is put in its passive, or its passive form. Um, Thus, it was fulfilled what was written. Um, and you get the sense that that's talking clearly about a prophetic sense, where something is an oracle is spoken of in the past, and then somebody comes and embodies or manifests that, to which the oracle was pointing, and therefore you can say that it was fulfilled. um, with Matthew 5:17, you have something a bit different going on, because it's in an active voice. Jesus is actively doing something. I think if he wanted to convey the same idea as in other instances of the passive in Matthew, he would have said, um, I have not come to abolish the law and the prophets, but I have come that they might be fulfilled." Something to that effect. That's one point. You have this parsing issue. It's not the same, and lexicons will make these distinctions based on the parsing. um I mean, language sort of works that way. There's a different meaning essentially between, in many respects, from passive to active. But the other point, against Carlos's position, is that the very text itself, Matthew 5:17 through 20, creates a parallelism between abolishing and breaking. In verse 17, it's, "Do not think to yourselves that I have come to abolish the law and the prophets." And then he says in verse 19, "Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so." Um, so you have this parallel, and then the other side of that parallel is, "I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill." And then the other part of verse 19 is, "And whoever keeps one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do so will be great in the kingdom of heaven." So you have uh, a parallelism between abolish and break, and fulfill and keep and teach. Um, so the text itself is defining what fulfill means. And then it gets even better. Jesus goes on in the rest of chapter 5 and into 6 to lay out a series of contrasting statements. The one statement, the first part of the contrast, is our statements made that people are hearing, that some people are saying. And then he says, "But I say to you." Um, and the nature of what he's doing through the rest of chapter 5 is teaching. What is he teaching? He's teaching people how to keep the commandments. Um, a good example of this is the often misunderstood contrast, where Jesus says, "You have heard that it is said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that if you look after a woman to lust after her in your heart, you have already committed adultery in your heart. The English translations that render that verb as lust are doing a bit of disservice to us because that Greek verb is the same Greek verb that's in the Ten Commandments, the 10th commandment, in fact. Thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife or yada yada yada. Um, and so what's deficient in what some of the Pharisees are saying is they're simply fixated on I just don't commit adultery. All the while they're coveting. And coveting is a more fundamental issue. So you can't pretend to say I'm not committing adultery and all the while you're also coveting. You're actually committing adultery because you're doing something even more fundamental in the law of Moses, which is coveting. And so that's Yeshua's point. It's like if you covet, um, you're you're already you're already committing adultery. You're doing something fundamental, something more weighty. A weightier matter in the law is coveting than simply the act of adultery, and therefore, by extension, you're basically it's just as if you're committing adultery. Um, so it gets to the heart of the matter, but it's the law of Moses. Make no mistake. That's not Jesus coming up with like some more super hard um uh standard. And it's not Jesus coming up with his own law that supersedes the law of Moses. No, he's just taking people back to the law of Moses. The 10th commandment, people. You can't just fixate on the do not commit adultery and then you forget the 10th commandment. If you stumble on the 10th commandment, you're guilty of all, basically, to borrow sort of the same sort of argumentation that James employs in his epistle. Um, yeah, so that's yeah, so that was one of the big parts of the debate there was Matthew 5. And there's a ginormous difference between the two interpretations of that passage between Matthew and Carlos. All right. Well, I think I've reached the end of this stream. I'm a little bit out of time. So, but anyways, just a quick recap. This was a review of the debate between Matthew Jansen and Carlos Xavier on the question, the debate topic, did Jesus practice and preach the law of Moses? It was a a good, enjoyable debate. Didn't get um dumb. Two individuals that are able to keep their cool uh and stay focused, and um it didn't devolve into a shouting match, which is often what debates do, and I appreciated that. Anyways, uh yeah, um that's it for this live stream. I do have, just if you're still watching, I do have in the works getting ready to upload a discussion, a lengthy probably a two-part discussion that I had with an associate. We Um, we reviewed a recent video put out by Sean McDowell and William Lane Craig. They were responding apologetically to a a book that's been um, getting quite popular in regards to the topic of atonement. It's a book by um, Andrew Remington Rilera, uh, and it's called Lamb of the Free. And an interesting book. I haven't read it yet. There are portions that I'm somewhat familiar with. I'm familiar his with some of his argumentation, but it's a basic uh exegetical critique of penal substitutionary atonement theory. And So I spent some time with my friend Rosser to go through some parts of the video, some key points, and to critique their critique in a sense. Um, and uh, I've been a fan of William Lane Craig in the past, when I was more enthused about apologetics. But I have since, especially in regards to the topic of atonement, I think William Lane Craig is just simply out of his field. And um, does the topic a great disservice because he's just not abreast with the scholarship over the last 50, 60 years. And he's sort of stuck in traditional evangelical land. Um, and he wants to, well, he just wants to be an apologist. Um, he's not a scholar in regards to this subject. And so I think, well, anyways, so I'll be hopefully done editing and uploading that soon. I know it's been a while since I put out any content. It's been over a month. Um, I've tried to do at least a an episode every 2 weeks or so, but it's been a while. So hopefully I'll be able to get that up here on the channel soon. So you can, for those who are interested in the topic of atonement, I know I'm very passionate about it. Aside from talking about the historical context of Paul and the law of Moses and Jesus and the New Testament. The topic of atonement is the second um, close runner up to the topic that I'm interested in and I'm passionate about. I like to teach and to help people understand what atonement is in the Bible. So, anyways, keep on the lookout for that. I hope to have it again uploaded soon. But until then, uh, hope you all have a wonderful evening, wonderful week, uh, and that you continue to join me on this journey of refining our exegetics, so that we can not only interpret the Bible correctly, but also give inspiring interpretations of our own stories. So again, thank you. Have a good night.